All righty. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this latest episode of our podcast series here, the RPG Limit Breaks. We are going to be talking about some Final Fantasy Relay action, and this is going to be a lot of fun because we've got one coming up. We'll be sure to cover that. But first, let's cover who all is here. My name is Bonnie Vaughn, and I'll be joined by Steamed Hams with Cheese to do this interview here, and who we're going to be interviewing today are Maelstrom and Cereth, who are very heavily involved with the production of this Final Fantasy Relay series. So, gentlemen, how are we all doing today?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Doing great, thank you.
Excellent. So, let's start with, like I said, you are part of the management or the admin for the Final Fantasy Relay series. Tell me, gentlemen, specifically, what are your roles and what are your, what's kind of like your title as far as all that goes?
Sure. Titles don't really exist per se, I guess.
Okay.
But me and Cereth at the moment are two of the three people who basically run the event, and it's all pretty collaborative. There's fairly equally split between the three of us. The other person being Kristen, who's another British Final Fantasy speedrunner. So all the kind of spreadsheet wrangling and announcements and whatever generally goes through the three of us. It's not really a one person does individual parts of it. And then during the event as well, we all take shifts just kind of manning the technical side of things and keeping it all on the rails.
Okay. Yeah, it's all pretty equal. I'd say myself and Chris do a bit more of the pre-show stuff. I'd say Maelstrom does a bit more of the tech stuff on the stream layout stuff. I'm sure we'll get to a bit later. And he'll talk your ear off about all the programming about the layout and the splits and stuff. That's more his domain. So there are sort of, I wouldn't say roles as such, but there are certain things we do where
very good.
Our skills are sort of better suited for different tasks. So.
Gotcha. Okay, that's good. Now, let's talk about the beginning of this series, because this is far from the first Final Fantasy Relay that you've had. This one that's going to be coming up later this month is number what in as far as how many relays you've had before?
Yeah, so this is the Relay 9, but it's the 10th event overall. So the first one was way back in July 2015.
Yeah, and
it's been going pretty regularly since then.
Okay.
The schedule was a bit all over the place for the first few. We couldn't really kind of settle on where we wanted it. But the last few years, it's been pretty consistently kind of August time now that we've kind of settled on.
Yeah. All right. So you've done quite a few of these, which is great, and they always have fantastic turnouts and lots of hype and whatnot. But I want to talk about, or I want you gentlemen to talk about the very beginning, how this whole idea came together, how it all began. Tell us about where this idea came from.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the genesis of it really is back in the old Speedruns Live IRC channels, for anyone who remembers that. And it's obviously been a few years since I think those have been active for anybody nowadays, with the rise of Discord and everything kind of getting replaced. But that definitely used to be kind of the hub for Final Fantasy speedrunning and a lot of other games as well, but definitely the FF community is pretty well concentrated there. And the idea of like a big kind of series marathon or race or whatever had been kind of floated around a few times, but every time it came up, everyone was like, "Oh, it'll never happen. It's too hard to organize. You'll never get all the people." And I think kind of late 2014-ish, I'd played through Final Fantasy 13 and started running that game, and that was kind of like my introduction to the community. And like fairly soon after, we planned out a trilogy relay race for the Final Fantasy 13 games, because there was a lot more like, hey, we could do this, it's viable, that's an interesting thing to do.
Like a bite size.
Well, at the time it still seemed massive, right?
Yeah, right. And now with obviously the perspective now, of course.
Yeah, but kind of, made that happen, and it was fairly successsul. And then it was just kind of a case of one day, it's like, yeah, why can't we do this for the whole thing? So I think I probably, to some extent, instigated it. I can't remember the exact timeline anymore, because it's like, almost 9-10 years ago. I don't remember if I made the sign-up sheet first and then posted it and said, deal with it, everybody sign up, or if I went around and tried to find people to run it with But it ended up being me, Cereth, and then 2 other people, which were Rory Extra Life and Seven Sins, who kind of got together and were like, yeah, we can at least try and make this happen.
Yeah.
And it worked, and I guess the rest is history, really.
Yeah.
And at the time, there were a lot of like 456 relays and some 789 relays. And then, yeah, Maelstrom organized the 13 trilogy relays, and it's like, just stick these things together. I don't know that there are any 1, 2, 3 relays, because there's almost nobody running like 2 and 3.
No, and three especially was a big problem the first time around.
It's true.
Why is that?
Well, because at the time, like the only version that really was viable was NES. Like, the DS version existed, but basically no one ran it. I guess PSP existed as well, but again, there wasn't really the interest there. And I think this was before there was any PC ports for like the 3D re-releases and stuff.
Got it.
So I guess again, like DS, but that's not going to happen because like there's even less DS runners than there are anything else, right? Because it's such an annoying
is
system.
Always fun.
Exactly, and
yeah,
I think this was back when like emulation wasn't that great either, possibly.
Yeah.
So in the end, we ended up having to do the true any percent run of FF3, as in like the 7-minute glitch credits warp thing, which, as you can imagine, is a bit of a nightmare on the tech overhead for getting everything swapped out for a 7-minute run and then immediately going again with the next game.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even then, it was pretty hard to actually get people to do it. I think we had to possibly convince someone to learn it for the event just so we could say we had it all.
Oh boy,
it takes like 30 minutes to learn. Like,
yeah, at least it's a very short and easy run, so that you could do that.
Yeah,
that was purely there just because we wanted to keep the 1 through 13. 15 wasn't out at the time, so just 1 through 13 was the first event, and we had to have all the numbers.
Yeah, I'm curious to know how you guys got from just the small event to the all the games that you have now. Like, how long did that take to get everybody all together? A few years, or was it the next year?
So sorry, was that like between the trilogy relay and then the full one? Or...
and then the full.
So
relay.
the trilogy relay for 13 was, I think, either early 2015 or very late 2014. That was about 6-7 months between the two.
Oh, and then so it grew that fast. That's great.
Speaking of the history of the event, you got someone in chat here correcting you, Maelstrom, as far as remembering. If I just dropped a sign-up sheet or whatnot, they're saying, "Yep, that's what you did. You just dropped it in there and said go." So
I can believe it.
That's how that. That's how that went.
Because I think we just needed to see if it was possible at all, right? It wasn't so much sign-ups; it was more like an interest check,
like
right?
gauging interest and seeing how feasible it actually is to have people for it. I understand.
There's definitely a thing for like events this big where it's like inertia's king, right? Like once you start the ball rolling, people will jump on it, but like no one's willing to give it the initial push.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of events start that way. So this is a pretty familiar tale, I would say. Speaking of events starting, we have another version of the Final Fantasy Relay that's going to be getting underway in less than 2 weeks. Specifically, it will be getting started on August 16th, which is a Sunday. No, I'm sorry, it's a Friday.
Yeah,
it starts on Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern time. And the first game is going to be Final Fantasy 15. So that will be something you want to tune in for. And more specifically, we've got some action going on today as far as this Final Fantasy Relay goes. Tell the folks what they can look forward to as far as that goes today.
So today we'll be announcing all of the runners for the relay. We won't be announcing the teams. So normally there's 3 teams. That will be next week. But today people will find out if they're actually running a game or not. And then after that we'll start sorting out the commentary as well, which is like a separate thing. I guess unique to the relay is we do specific commentary teams for each game. So the runners typically don't do any commentary at all. They just focus purely on the run. Which I don't think is very common in events.
Right. And that selection of the actual. So once you have the participants named, you sort them into teams, and the actual teams are going to be announced how and where. Why don't you tell the folks about that too?
So we organized a pre-show. This was sort of inspired by Nico RTAs, so the Japanese kind of RTA people. They typically do like a pre-show announcing what the event is and talking about the games and stuff, and we sort of took inspiration from that. And now we organize our own pre-show. So like a week before the event, so next week on the RPG Limit Break channel. We'll be
right here. Oh, that's convenient.
Follow. Yes, we do a pre-show. We'll announce all the teams there, and we sort of we host a person from each game, typically a runner from each game, to talk about the game, explain like what to look out for, what's cool about the game, and to try and get people interested in the game that maybe don't know the game or haven't played it, or are just unfamiliar with the speedruns. So yeah, that's when the runners find out about the teams. We will actually probably know the teams before that, technically, but to sort of build some excitement. And because people don't need to know in advance the teams, what team they're on, we sort of leave it a little bit late. It's a bit of fun.
Yeah, because and there's really no knowing in advance doesn't really give any sort of any sort of, there's no strategy that goes into it for them. They're assigned to their teams, and then the order of the games is already predetermined. So it's not like they can shift things around there to try to get some sort of psychological advantage to gain or lose time or whatnot. Which actually brings me into the next question that I want to ask here is that how many different games are in this particular relay?
So this time around, I think it's 18 games.
Okay, so 18 games. So you're scheduling out 18 games for an event that spans over 2 and almost 3 days, no breaks.
Almost 4. It's over 3. I think this one's
it's over 3 and almost
around like 80 something hours. I think is the predicted
okay. Yeah,
runtime.
so we're looking at about 3.5 days. So you're scheduling all of this. There's no breaks, but not only that, you have to schedule which games are going to be when without even knowing who are going to be the runners for each game. And we're not talking about 1 for each game. We're talking about 3 for each game. So that has, I want you to talk about just how complicated and delicate a process that is to do the scheduling given those circumstances.
Yeah, sure. So again, we can kind of go back in the history a little bit here, because we didn't used to do it this way. The very first few events, I think up to Relay 4, we played the games like in order, or in like original release order, effectively, which was nice and thematic, but actually had a lot of glaring problems. Not only in terms of kind of people can't really influence availability at all, it's just like you do it or you can't kind of thing. But also it has the kind of the downside of having like 7, 8, 9, 10 all next to each other, which obviously are quite like long games and like potentially like cutscene heavy games, and it really like slows the pacing of the entire event down. So I think from Relay 5 onwards, I think we started to be like, okay, how can we rearrange things to make it more convenient for everybody, and kind of open it up. So what we do nowadays is let people say which days are available and give like a rough indication of like what times they're kind of willing to do a run, I guess. And then we try and work around that as best we can. And to be fair to everybody who participates, like most people are very willing to do a run at absolutely terrible times for their availability for the most part, which is super helpful, because without that, it just wouldn't work. There's definitely some games that know they're generally going to get the short end of the stick when it comes to scheduling, and people seem to be relatively acceptant of that, so that works in our favor. But the other angle as well is that it's actually sometimes easier now because we have such a wide range of runners from the US, Europe, Asia as well. We can sometimes shuffle things around so that if there's like multiple Japanese runners in a game, for example, then we can schedule it at a time that's more convenient for them, but maybe would be a worse time for America or vice versa. And so we do try and kind of gauge the interplay of that and like shuffle stuff around to make it as convenient as we can for people. There's also an element of which games go where in the schedule. We've kind of gone back and forward on like how we do this, but but sometimes we've tried to put like the more stable games nearer the start and then the kind of wilder games near the end to try and like mix things up a little bit. But again, it's not necessarily a rule. It's just like sometimes it's nice to do that. Just so when everyone's starting off, we kind of keep things not necessarily together more, but at least like a little bit more predictable, and then things kind of slowly get crazier as time goes on, as they all want to do no matter what we do anyway. Although I think at this point we've probably tried to influence it, because it never quite does what we think it's going to do anyway. So you just got to kind of let it go and see what happens, really.
With any marathon, you got to roll with the punches.
I think this year was particularly bad for that sort of thing. But for us, I think there is a sort of like priority system, I guess, where it's like the most important thing is that we have the runners on those days. And then it's like, okay, let's try and make the times better. So it's like, oh, this person's in New Zealand. Okay, we can put the run at night for us because for them it's a good time. And we try and make the games at a good time for everyone, if possible. But the more important thing is, of course, that runners are available in the first place. So
yeah.
And then it comes down to like, oh, it'd be nice if we don't put all the long games next to each other. Let's put like some short games in there and some long games in there. And then it's like, oh, if a game is new for the first time, let's try and get the new game at a good time so people can actually watch it. And so we have lots of like preferences that we like to do, but that doesn't take precedent over like actually making sure we can include the game and, you know, make sure the runners can show up.
Yeah, just like with any just like with any marathon, obviously you have your base needs is, can this person do it at this time? If the answer is no, then that's obviously an insurmountable problem. But then once you do within that availability, being able to, that's something I hadn't considered is keeping, you know, maybe games that are longer from being consecutive, and also maybe some games that are more maybe have a lot more action as far as menuing and combat and whatnot, as opposed to ones that are a lot more longer cutscenes, more text mashing and whatnot, to kind of get some variety there, so you don't have kind of clumps of similar style speed runs. Obviously there's similar style games for the most part, but similar to styles of speed runs consecutively, just to kind of keep things interesting there. But again, with you having to do this again, not just for one person, but for 3 people for each single game, that can't give you much wiggle room, can it?
No, we are quite often on negative amounts of wiggle room, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, especially like taking this year for an example, I think we're on our 4th or 5th variation of the schedule now from when we originally posted it, just because like things changed last minute and we had to make some shuffles, or like certain people had to drop out, or we, you know, trying to get new people in or whatever. It definitely hasn't been a smooth one this time around. But I think it rarely is.
Yeah. You know, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think this year was probably our hardest year for scheduling, and you know, we had some last minute changes we had to make which unfortunately made it that some people can't show up at all. So like, it's just unfortunate, but this year was just tough for us.
Yeah. Now, something that we had talked about before, which is the participants in the actual relay itself, or at least the intended participants, being announced today. But then also, I assume your games are going to have alternate runners for each one. Talk about, you know, roughly how many each has, and how you go into planning for that.
Yeah, so at the moment, for the last few events, we've been able to be very lucky and keep it to 3 teams, which kind of, since we started doing that, it's like much better in a lot of ways, but obviously has a lot more people involved. So generally we try and have it, like the ideal situation for us is 3 runners and 2 backups per game, which obviously if you do the math for 18 people is 90 runners, which is a wild number. That's a very big asterisk of like where possible. We will frequently have games where there's only 1 backup, or sometimes even no backups. And again, we've been fortunately very lucky that we've not really had to kind of dip into that pool very often. There's been a couple of very close calls, but yeah, we've definitely like locked out over the years that it's never really been a problem in that respect.
I think there was a couple of years ago, someone had a power cut like half an hour before their run, and it was like We had no idea if they're going to show up or not.
Oh,
Then we try and call on the back of runner, like, are you ready to run? And they didn't even have the game installed. So like,
Oh my
it's,
Yeah.
but we get lucky and we just have to roll with it, do what we can.
I think we ended up just pushing the whole event back by like 30 minutes, 40 minutes or something like that in the end and starting late. But luckily it all kind of worked out from there.
that is good. Yes. Yeah. So now we talked about the selection of the actual runners themselves, and there's a process where they have to submit practice time so you can kind of see that they're actively wanting to do this and kind of figure out where they're going to be at. But then also there's the games themselves that you have to select, and obviously this is something you do on the front end, where if you're doing a relay of the Final Fantasy, mainline games, as far as which actual games you're going to choose, that's pretty much set if you want to keep with that theme. But to go even deeper, there is the actual which versions of the games, with like which platform they're going to be on, and then based on that, or maybe even the other way around, determining which category you're going to do. If it's going to be 100%, any percent, no, like no sketch for 6, no math for tactics, whatever. If you're doing that, things like that. So I want you to talk about, at least for this year, and you can talk about other ones if you want to, what went into determining which versions and which categories of each of the Final Fantasy games you wanted to have featured in this relay.
Sure. So I think our first priority is always just the numbered games, right? We always try and keep the mainline games 1 through 16 without 11 and 14. And then we kind of pick and choose side games as best we can. I think the main priority there is probably games we haven't had before. We always try and include something we haven't got. As time goes on, this gets harder to do because, well, for 2 reasons, I guess. One is that there's more mainline games now than ever before, right? They keep adding new games. We've got 16 now for the first time. That's like an 8-hour speedrun or so. So that's 8 hours less that you have to spend on the side games. And then there's obviously, as we do more side games, there are a few that we haven't done before. So we take what we can get in some ways. To get 3 runners for a side game is tough. Most side games only have a couple runners. Or if there are a few, they're not all running at the same time. There's maybe like 5 years ago the last did a run or something. So we just have to get lucky that people are running the game or willing to run the game. Sometimes people learn the games just to be in the relay. I think a couple people learn Tactics Advanced too, just for this relay, which is really cool.
Wow.
And so like as the relay gets bigger, or as the relay got bigger, I should say, people were more willing to sort of learn games, get more involved because they want to take part and make the event better, right? Even though participants care about the event to put themselves out and learn runs and get better at the runs and stuff. It's really nice.
Yeah. Now, as far as the categories go, is there any consideration there as far as like marathon safeties? As marathon safety goes, where you don't want to have a category that's too volatile, or maybe you do want to have a category that's volatile because it can give a lot of opportunity for folks that are or teams that are behind in the relay to catch up, maybe teams that are ahead to kind of pad or extend their leads. Is any consideration as far as that aspect goes for which categories are chosen?
Yeah, so category selection again is that kind of interesting line between viability and variation a little bit. Again, we like to include things we haven't had before. So if some new glitch gets discovered and now any percent uses this crazy new glitch, which again, to use a recent example, Final Fantasy 15, the 80% for that game has got some wild stuff in it. I won't spoil it now because if you want to see more, you should check out the relay.
Yep.
But like that was like here's a effectively brand new category that's like a completely different showing of the game. That's like this would be really great to include it if we can. It's something different that people haven't seen before, right? Whereas if it's just the same game over and over again, and like sometimes not necessarily stale, but like there will always be like a core set of runners who always run like, for example, like FF10 any percent, for example, and that becomes like a very stable pool of people that we can always pull from. So again, kind of similar to side games, it's like we'll usually offer up like a couple of options. There'll usually be kind of like one or two kind of more wildcard categories that are like ones we'd like to see or like haven't had before that seem like they've got the interest behind them, and then we'll have like a couple of like fallbacks of like we're pretty sure that we'll get the runners for this, and this is like the safe option, but we'd prefer to have like the one we haven't had. Do it.
Yeah, and I think that's nice too, because if you have people that run just a certain category for like I'll actually use myself as a great example. The only Final Fantasy Relay I've ever participated in was a few years ago, when that was one that had, when you did Final Fantasy IV, SNES, no credits warp, because that's the category of the game that I run. If you do no 64, like I haven't done full runs of that before. So choosing different categories allows you to pull from different actual runners that maybe run the game, but not that specific category. So is there any consideration given to that, where we want to keep it fresh so that we can keep a fresh set of actual people, of the actual runners that are participating in the events?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. Again, like, something we've tried to do for a long time and eventually kind of got there last year with Final Fantasy 1 NES, where like, we never had NES for the first 7 or so events, which, like, to some extent you would think is kind of surprising. It's like, well, of course people run the NES version, right? But it's like, well, actually getting them interested and wanting to partake in the event is like a whole different part, right? And there's definitely like a big element of like community outreach and like trying to get ourselves like an into some of those subgroups in games and be like, hey guys, the relay's happening, you should sign up because we'd like to have this category and all this game in, and we haven't had it before. And yeah, so then we end up getting like a wider range of people over time, but it's definitely a bit of give and take, because obviously we can put it on the signups all we want, but if people either don't know the event's happening or don't want to sign up, then there's obviously very little we can do about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Steamed, I know that you wanted to ask them about kind of more of the technical aspects of what goes into making this happen here.
Yeah, so there's a lot of background stuff that I'm sure that a lot of people don't see, like restreaming and hot swapping and how you guys do splits, because you have to, basically it's a marathon. So it's not just like a sprint to the finish, you got to pass off the baton to everybody. Just curious how that all works behind the scenes and how you guys make the magic happen.
Yeah, sure. So at least in terms of the restreaming side, we've pretty much always used an RTMP server rather than people streaming to their own Twitch channels or whatever. Just makes it a little bit easier for us to get hold of the feeds. But a lot of the rest of the stuff is maybe like more manual than people might think it is, possibly in like a slightly surprising way. So a lot of the actual layout automation, like all the information you're seeing during the relay, there's like one master program that I created for the first event, and they've just kind of continually updated since then, really. That's doing a lot of the kind of heavy lifting in terms of running the timers, showing the splits for all the teams, showing a graph, all that kind of stuff. For the actual runner swaps, it's basically that like whichever person from management is kind of on the tech shift at the time is remoting into the stream PC and has a little window open where it's like changing the URL to the next runner, and then it's just waiting to hit the go button when they finish their run. And so the swaps can get a little hairy sometimes, especially if multiple games are swapping at the same time, or like multiple teams are swapping at the same time, or if people are very close on the final boss and you don't know which order they're going to finish in. It can get fun, I guess is a good word to use. But it is very much like runner finishes and tells us, or we tell the next person to go, and then everything just kind of kicks off from there, really.
Yeah, so the runners aren't controlling their splits or hot swap in there. That's they're just purely focusing on the run.
Yeah, exactly. The splitting again used to be something that we did like as management, ourselves, and that was a terrible idea. And I'm surprised we put it up for as long as we did, to be honest. But again, the last couple of events, the innovation there is we've got like a little client program that basically one commentator from each team uses, and they're hitting the split buttons basically, so that we don't have to, one, have as much knowledge of the game, and then two, don't always have to be kind of like paying attention the whole time, because obviously over 4 days that's a lot. It's nice for us to be able to kind of walk away for 10 minutes without everything exploding sometimes. But yeah, so we have that very much like on the commentators now.
I think the first time we did it too, we couldn't go back and correct things if we made a mistake. So sometimes like a split would happen, and because we were doing it, we didn't know the game or whatever. Sometimes 20 minutes would pass before we realized that end of the split graph and everything was all messed up for ages because we can't go back and fix it. You know, every year we make improvements and things get better, and it's all pretty good now. There's almost nothing we can improve on, I'd say. But
yeah, it's just because you mentioned that. Think about the first relay that you run and the one that you're about to be running here in a couple weeks. Just what sort of leaps and bounds have you made in the actual organization, the presentation, the planning and whatnot, from where it was in the beginning to today? Tell us maybe just a couple of the more notable processes that you use now that you weren't using in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, the sign-up flow in a lot of ways has kind of only really changed in small ways throughout the years. So like when people sign up through to kind of when we have team picks and everything, the big thing that really changed there was the introduction of the practice runs, which we only started doing a few years ago. It wasn't kind of there for the first few events. And again, kind of like you mentioned earlier, partly to check people are actually playing the game and still in it, but also it's a very useful aid for like balancing the teams as well sometimes. And again, it just lets us prove that, yeah, we can see if someone's running or someone's not running, or if they're having trouble doing no reset runs, which is, again, I think something people don't often think about when they sign up for an event. But obviously, you know, if you're doing a normal runs and you're resetting really heavily, you don't necessarily notice anything's wrong. Yeah. And then someone forces you to do a no reset run and you're like, I don't remember the end of this game at all. And it's like, that's a problem.
Yeah. Well, and also too, this is unique for this particular type of marathon where it's RPGs, and even more specifically Final Fantasies, where, you know, if you have a category that takes 5, 6, 7, 8 hours to do, it's not like a run that takes 15 or 20 minutes to do, where you could just reset if something slightly goes wrong and you could just bang out runs. If it's going to take you 6 hours to complete a run, you're not resetting 3 hours in. You know, you're just gonna finish it out. Well, typically speaking, you're gonna finish it out because you're like, well, I'm already halfway into it. I might as well get something out of it. So, has that been an issue in the past where people have not been used to doing no reset runs for something like this? Because that's honestly that if so, that's kind of surprising.
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily like an issue with it not being used to doing no reset runs, but there's definitely something to be said about like knowing everything that can go wrong in your run and being ready for it.
Yeah,
for sure, that's true. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people will, like, something will go wrong in their run and not necessarily know like a good backup, whatever, because normally they would just reset, or
I see.
Know, what's the point? Like, this is a 2-minute time loss, and then don't deal with a 2-minute time loss. They just reset. So yeah, sometimes it is important to know those backups for those, you know, for events. But that, sometimes it's good because it can tell the difference between the teams, right? Of like, oh, both teams got this bad luck and got the 2-minute time loss, but this runner can deal with it better. And so they save a bunch of time because they're more experienced with different strats and stuff.
Yeah, and we do try and encourage people to kind of use similar safety strats or like save in the same places as well to try and like iron out some of the differences there and just kind of make sure that everyone's on like the same stable footing a little bit. So that even if something does go catastrophically wrong, everyone's like, oh, we all saved 10 minutes ago. So that's like the upper limit on like what could possibly be lost effectively.
Yeah. Certainly. So now, Steve was talking before about, or was asking before about the technical aspects of what's going on here. But as far as, I mean, we were talking before, this is an event that takes 3 or 4 days to complete. So when it comes to the viewers, excuse me, obviously there's a lot of people, pardon me, a lot of people that are coming in and out as far as watching it. You're not going to sit here and watch the whole thing from beginning, and it's just not feasible. So when people are coming in, there's obviously a lot going on. You got 3 different races, different places. Sometimes people might be on different games if things have gotten off. So for someone jumping into the stream, it could be very difficult to kind of know what's going on when you're coming in. But this is where I want you to talk a lot more about the layout for the marathon itself, where it's got all kinds of information, what game's going on, who's running it, who's doing commentary, where the splits are, how far behind they are. Talk to me about how that layout, kind of came together, and also kind of how it works, because it's so crucial for the viewing experience for people to be able to see all of that information in a nice, neat presentation. So talk about everything that goes into setting that up and how that works.
Yeah, sure. So again, this is like an interesting problem in terms of like visual clarity, because I think over the time we used to have a lot more information being shown a lot more often, and we've actually kind of cut back over time because we kind of, certain things weren't necessary or kind of weren't really useful. And again, like you said, you want that kind of quick glance of like someone's come in, they can not necessarily understand everything that's going on, but at least get a very decent idea quite quickly. It's like, okay, I get it. And then it's like, okay, I want to dig deeper on certain bits of information. How do I get that information? So definitely something that kind of, not only the layout, but also the info doc that we run kind of alongside, the kind of 2 things work in parallel. So we have that kind of a separate Google Doc that has what games are going to be run, what the times were if certain games are finished already. And then it has like the history of all of the splits and all of the graph and stuff if you want to look at that kind of more like statistic side of it. Or if you've gone to sleep, you wake up, you want to see what happened overnight, take a look at the graph, and it kind of shows you visually, okay, this person had a very bad time in this game or whatever, rather than having to skim through like the 60-hour VOD to see what happened in the last 3 hours. Because again, it's just not practical. But a lot of the rest of it is, oh, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I think part of what we do is we look at like what people are asking constantly in the chat and stuff like that, and we try and solve those problems for next year. So if people are constantly asking, who's in the lead? Who's in the lead? Who's in the lead? It's like, okay, let's try and find a way that we can answer that question before they've asked it. Or if they're asking like, what happened? Why is this team suddenly in the lead now? What happened to this team? Then hopefully we can provide this graph. And we can't answer that question precisely. I don't think there's ever a solution for that. But we can at least be like, oh, hey, 10 minutes ago they lost 5 minutes. And, we can try and answer questions before people ask. Not only to try and change this chat problem, but also that I'm always conscious that there's a lot of lurkers, people that don't chat. So I think for like probably 90% of the viewers aren't actually chatting, and it's easy to focus on people that are. So for me, I try and focus on like, what question would I ask if I wasn't typing in the chat for whatever reason I don't have an account, and I just try and answer those questions so that people aren't required to ask them. And so I think that's a focus for me every year, is like, what was the problem last year, and listen to the feedback we get, and solve those problems. As far as layout goes, we do get some feedback sometimes about the layout, and we're reluctant to make changes for our own personal reasons, or we just don't think that the feedback is necessarily good. A very common one, and a change we had this year actually, is runner names on the feeds is something we've always avoided. We usually put the runner names into like the box in the corner, and we don't like covering up the game feed. So because we always we put like limited information over the games. We try and make the games as visible as possible.
Yeah.
We make an exception for team icons because we have team colors, but for like colorblind purposes, I don't like focusing on just colors, so we have the team icons there. And then the timers for each game is relatively important. I think there was probably a relay we didn't have the timers because that, again, it was just in the info box. But we conceded that, and now we're also adding the names of the runners. Because it gets asked a lot, and it's not necessarily clear that it's in the info box. And the info box thing is like cycling between like split information, runner information, commentators, and stuff. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because there really is a lot of information that people need to have. So you can certainly, when you want to have somebody coming in, you don't want to overload them with just all kinds of different graphs and numbers and things pointing in different directions, I could see how it could all get very, very confusing. So there's a box there that cycles the information, which is nice too, because if you really want to get all the information, you actually have to tune in and pay attention to what's going on for a few minutes so that you can see it. And it's nice. It kind of draws viewers in and gets them involved with what's going on. But you talked a lot about the feedback that you've gotten from folks regarding what they want to see, what they don't want to see, and whatnot. And it seems like you heed a lot of that, which is awesome. But talk about what is that cycling box there. What is that information that people see in there, and why is it so important to show it to them for their viewing experience?
Sure. So the current version of the layout has 3 panels that we cycle through. The first one is the splits. So it's like named of splits along the bottom, and then the times that each team hit that location, kind of lined up with the team color, effectively. So you can see like, okay, Team Mog beat this section at making up examples, exactly 10 hours, but then like Team Choco was 10 hours and 15 minutes, so they're 15 minutes behind, right? And then we usually have like a difference display as well, so it's like, okay, that means they're currently 15 minutes ahead, or whatever it is. The second screen is commentators and runners and the category for the game. And again, something we finally got around to doing a couple of years ago is that having the commentators highlight when they're talking as well. So you can tell who you're listening to.
That's always nice.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's like sounds really nice in theory, and it sounds like, oh yeah, it's really simple, right? It's like, no, that was a massive annoyance to me.
It involves audio. It's not simple. I understand this already.
Yeah, and then the third panel is basically like the splits one, but it's this graph basically showing kind of what the last 5 splits or whatever look like visually, so you can kind of see the trends. And it goes back and forth, so you get the runners and commentators twice as often as the ones on either side.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's definitely my favorite part of that layout is seeing the graph, and it's just a super simple, easy to digest visual for the trends. You know, who's been gaining ground, who has been, who's been separating, who's been falling behind. It makes it, when you're trying to decipher it with the numbers, especially if folks aren't currently on the same split and it's staggered, it can be a bit of a challenge. But that chart that you're talking about, the graph, erases all doubt. It makes it very, very easy to see what's going on. So that's just,
I think it makes it fun as a viewer. I was saying it makes it fun as a viewer too, just to see all like the green line going up and the red line being flat, and just you get excited for that race to pump up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why when people are doing speedrunning on their channel, why they show their splits, so that you can see red and green numbers. Hey, is this a good run, or whatnot. But I mean, everybody loves a race, and for a race to last, not just 3 or 4 hours, but in this case 3 or 4 days, there's a lot that's going on there. So having that, putting all of that into a layout, is definitely a pretty major challenge, but one that I feel like you folks do really well. So it's great to see all the details that go into it. Let me last question before we move on here. What are some of the favorite aspects of the presentation that you have on the channel that you've put into the relay? Like, what are some of your personal touches that you're the most proud of, or you think are the most important or vital?
I mean, I hate to say the graph again, but
no, you don't hate that. That's a great answer. I agree.
That was definitely one of those fun things as well, where kind of going back to the feedback element, like we didn't used to have the graph and it was just 2 teams, because it's kind of no point so much, right? Yeah. You're always going to be the same amount behind as the other person is ahead. There's no kind of split difference,
right?
And when we started doing 3 teams, we're like, okay, this is much more useful. and also during the event, we're quite often hanging out in Discord voice call or whatever, like in the event server, and there's usually like quite a lot of people also hanging out and watching the event. And when we started doing the graph on the spreadsheet, people in the voice call would start getting very excited, like when we were updating the graph. And so it was then like, okay, how can we actually put this into the mainstream for everyone else? Because clearly there's something here that people like, even if it is just like, oh, cool, more lines. Like, there's definitely something to be kind of like captured here and formalized. It's, it's a nice thing to be able to see. And it was definitely more useful than some of the stuff we've had in the past, like how long it took each team to beat each game, for example. Where it's like, yeah, it's nice to know that, but you don't need it to be constantly there as a reminder, because we have that separate Google Doc that you can go and look at for the detailed information if you want it. It doesn't need to be kind of taking up stream space because it's not really a crucial part of the experience.
Yeah. Cereth, what about you?
I think for me is definitely far less vital, but I really like that we recently started adding like country flags to like commentators and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's quite like a global event, and we'd like to try and be inclusive and stuff. And there's definitely like meaning behind it. We don't try and pit certain countries against each other or anything like that. But I think it's just cool to be like, oh, we got so many runners from Poland this year, and so many runners from Japan, and so many runners from like the Philippines or whatever. And it's just cool to see it's all this international event taking place, and I think it's a pretty cool thing.
That feels very appropriate with the Olympics going on right now.
I was going to say, dare I say, an Olympic style event.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they do have relays, but anyway. So I'm going to say this now for those of you that are watching, and we see the chat here for both Twitch and YouTube. Hi, YouTube, for those that are watching there. If you have any questions for Maelstrom or Cereth, go ahead and put it in chat. And if we have time, we'll go ahead and get to those. Anything that haven't that we might not have covered. But one thing that I do want to ask about, and again, this kind of has a personal significance for me, is that, again, we were talking about selecting the actual games that go into the marathon. And you've done, I don't know if you've done this before in a marathon, but this year you are, one of the games that's going to be run is Final Fantasy Adventure for the game. It's going to be the Warpless category for the Game Boy. And this is an interesting one because, very technically speaking, in a Final Fantasy, this is a Final Fantasy relay, and Final Fantasy Adventure is not actually a Final Fantasy game. It's from the Mana series, Seiken Densetsu, or whatever you want to call it. But you have included it in this marathon. So tell me about what it is that made you included in this, and was what were some of the discussions over whether or not it should be in there or whatnot. Tell me about that.
I don't think there was quite as much to it as you might expect, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I think for us, it's like, it's in the title, and I don't think anybody's going to complain, right? I think people will be excited to watch it. I think it's cool to include it.
Yes.
And so why not? Why restrict it on a technicality rather than just like, hey, let's just include it because we can, and because I think people will enjoy it, and it's something different. We haven't done it before.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things that was very community sourced, because when we put the signups out, we often have like a place that you can say like other games you'd like to see in the event, or like other games you'd be willing to run. And we had a bunch of people sign up saying FF Adventure, and it's like, well, if we have the people for it, and they've all already signed up, then that makes that a much easier decision in a lot of ways. It's not like we have to pick the game and then go find people. Have the people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's that power of like community effort.
The fact that it's relatively short comparatively to the other games, that it makes it easy to include. I think 2 hours is a really sweet spot for a side game, especially to just be like, this is hardly going to take up any time. And this year, recently, I guess in general, with the longer games, there's cutscene removers now, right? So 7, 8, 9, 10, I think all have cutscene removers. Maybe not 7, I'm not sure. So if we need to, and we're struggling for time, we can just crunch down and save like 6 hours, whatever, just like that. Like, oh, FF10, that's cutscene remover now. Boom, 6 hours. Okay, let's get some more side games in because we can. In some ways, the more games we can include, the better. To an extent, there's probably an upper limit, of like,
Yeah.
this is too many people now, it's too hard to schedule, let's stop doing that. But yeah, I think it's nice to include stuff if we can, and the signups were there was interest. Let's do it. I think we're down.
Yeah. I feel like oh, sorry,
Go ahead.
Danny, go ahead.
No. You go ahead, Steve.
You sound like you just answered it, but like, how do you do? Like, we do all the mainland games, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4. How do you pick the side games? Just runner availability? Is that it, or just timing aspect? Because I know the main lines take all the time up in the world, but like Final Fantasy Adventure might not. So you just throw it in there just to get it in there as like a new thing.
Kind of. I mean, we usually pick like 3 or 4 side games that either we haven't had for a while or we haven't had ever, and there appears to be active interest in. So, we'll look through like speedrun.com or Twitch VODs, and if like a bunch of people have picked up Tactics Advance, for example, or like the game is active at the moment, and it's like, okay, let's see if we can kind of hook this community in and involve this game. And then a lot of it's just kind of refinement based on what signups we get and how much time we think we have available, as to whether we kind of try and widen it out and include more, or we say, okay, we wanted 10-2, but no one's signing up for it, so clearly this isn't going to work. We need to find something else to fill the gap.
Gotcha. And that just goes right back into the technical aspects of making it all work and making all the magic happen.
With side games, the hardest part for sure is just getting the number of runners. If you've got the runners, we'll probably be able to include it, basically. So especially if it's one we haven't done before. So like, Final Fantasy Legend or something like that, just these more obscure side games we've never done before. We'd love to do them. And 3 runners plus ideally a backup runner plus the commentator team. It ends up being like a really difficult challenge for some games.
Yeah, and Legend's another one of those interesting cases where it's arguably a different series depending on which release name you look at, right? Because it's Saga.
Right.
But I mean, again, it being in the name is not always a hard restriction as well, because we had Chocobo GP last year and there's no Final Fantasy in that. But I don't think anyone could argue that that's not Final Fantasy adjacent, at least. Even if it isn't like a core Final Fantasy game. So
understood.
Adjacent at the very least,
like the edges definitely get kind of fuzzier around the side games.
Cereth, I wanted to ask you about something just based on a comment you just made where you talked about certain games having cutscene removers now where it's slicing multiple hours, especially when it comes to the collective of the relay, multiple hours out of the run, of course, assuming that you choose those categories, and having it, you kind of seem to suggest that it allows you to add in other games and whatnot. So my question based on that comment is, when you're planning this and you're looking at the estimates for all of the categories that you're choosing for the games, do you have, for the totality of the relay, do you have like an estimate time-wise that you're trying to hit? Maybe a number that you're trying to either not exceed or not fall under? Talk about the entire timing of the marathon, or the relay, and how your decisions based on fitting it into there. Does that exist?
I think our general goal is probably between 80 to 82 hours. I think our longest is around 84, which I think was the second relay, was the longest one. I'm always like probably the one trying to push it longer, try and include more stuff. And no, let's give it shorter. And so we kind of balance each other out.
Now, so based on that, do you have a floor for time where, this needs to be at least X number of hours? Is that a consideration?
Probably not so much. I think for the most part, we'll just like cutscenes, I'd say, for example, and for most games, kind of fill out the time naturally anyway.
Sure.
And we lean towards including the cutscene games, like include the cutscenes if we can, and if we need to cut them out with the removers, then we will. I think with the inclusion of like 16 this year and stuff, I don't think we're ever going to be too short on time, because we've just added 8 hours every single year. That's going to hopefully be there.
Well, until they develop a cutscene remover for that too, right?
Well, it's still not yet, but yeah.
No, I know, I understand. Yeah,
yeah, and it's not really the cutscenes that are taking up the time either in 16 so much.
Oh, really?
I mean, you have cutscenes in that game, so
cutscene battles.
It's just
yeah, very very cinematic battles in Final Fantasy 16 for sure.
I think when there is a PC release for that, it'll probably go like an hour faster just on loads and everything, frame rates and stuff.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, usually the factor we see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we can choose versions based on time there as well a bit. It's like flex between, I think like the PS1 games is probably a good example, like FF8 PC and PlayStation is like an hour difference. FF10 PlayStation 2 PC is like an hour difference. So we have a little bit of wiggle room there sometimes, depending on runners and what they're doing. These days, I'd say it's mostly just PC though, because everyone has gravitated toward just doing PC. It's just easier, more accessible.
Yeah.
But we try and mix those up when we can. If we have time to do like PlayStation, then we probably will, because it's nice. I think with our event compared to other events is we can get in these longer games and it's like a good place for them. Whereas in other events, like maybe RPG Limit Break itself, they'll tend towards doing more shorter games, or maybe like one long game, where it's like, oh no, we can do 7, 8, 9, 10 with all the cutscenes, and it might be the only event it gets into, sort of thing. So yeah, we tend to try and do cutscenes, I guess, is my point. We can.
Yeah, I think the flaw realistically is much more about just including every game than it is about time. You know, so if there was significant demand from the runners that they were like, oh, we'll only run with the cutscenes removed because we just don't have 9 hours in the day that we can do the run.
Yeah.
And that would kind of force our hand, but I don't think we'd have like an inherent issue with doing that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is something that's been a theme about the entire discussion we've had here today, is that you folks are very much, you listen to your community, you listen to the feedback, you listen to what people have to say as far as availability and what they do and don't want to do, and you seem to adapt to that very well, which could speak to one of the main reasons why this Final Fantasy Relay has been going on for so long, why it has so much hype, why people are really interested in it, because because you very clearly involve the community and make them a part of what you do, as opposed to just running it a certain way and just forcing people to fit into that specific framework. So that's fantastic. It's a testament to what you folks do and why this has been so successful and so popular over the years. So fantastic job, guys. Really appreciate it. We'll go ahead and wrap up here soon. But last question I want to ask the two of you here is, of all the games that are going to be coming up in this relay, for each of you, which one are you looking forward to the most and why?
I look forward to the games we haven't done before, genuinely. So it might be adventure. I have watched a little bit of adventure since. So I think for me, I'm going to say Tactic Advance 2. I don't know anything about this run. I've never seen any gameplay. Kind of looking forward to it. I probably would have said 7 Rebirth, but I still haven't finished 7 Rebirth.
Yeah, you're running out of time on that.
Yeah. I'm actually scheduled to be doing the handoff for 7 Rebirths, like the management. So I'm going to be the person switching from 7 Rebirth to whatever follows it.
Well,
so I need to watch the ending in the relay.
Yeah. Well, speaking of management, we just got rated by Chris Tenarium here. So and they seem to have some thoughts in chat, so do want to recognize, because you did mention before that Chris is kind of part of that admin team for Final Fantasy Relay, so shout outs to Chris there. MLSTRM, which one are you looking forward to for this, this coming event?
I think it's got to be 15. I think just like because I know a decent amount about how that kind of 20% run came together and like how it works behind the scenes. I think it's really like a really good example of like how far you can push speedrunning even in RPGs. So I'm pretty hyped to see that live, and also like really excited to see how other people react to it, because I think if you haven't seen it, it's like surprising. And I would definitely recommend that people check it out if they haven't seen it before.
Very good. Alrighty. Well, so the Final Fantasy Relay, at least the latest version of it, it begins on Friday, August 16th at 10 a.m. Eastern. Final Fantasy 15 is going to be the first game run there. All of the action for the Final Fantasy Relay is going to be right here, rpglimitbreak.com or Twitch TV/rpglimitbreak. I guess you could go to our website too and find the stream there, but you can do it right here. And then also be sure to tune in a week from today, 2 p.m. Eastern time. That is when all of the participants in the relay, as far as the runners go, are going to be slotted into 3 teams. There's Team Tonberry, Team Mog, and of course the best one, Team Choco. So that's that you'll want to look forward to. Well, no, that's the only team I've ever been on, and we won. So I guess that kind of makes it the best, right? Anyway, so but yeah, for those of you that want to see how everything is balanced out and how the teams are going to shake up, you want to tune in right here next week to check that out. So Cereth, Maelstrom, thank you both very much for being here today and talking about the relay and whatnot. I am very, very much looking forward to it. So, and I hope everybody out there is too, and I hope you all are looking forward to it as well. I'm sure it's an absolutely wild 4 days of getting everything put together. So again, gentlemen, thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you.
And yeah, absolutely. And on behalf of my co-host here, Steam's Hand with Cheese, I am Vonnie Vaughn. We are going to go ahead and sign off. But yeah, be sure to look forward to the Final Fantasy Relay coming up in less than 2 weeks. Very exciting. So yeah. Also, big shout out to our friendo Ashton Prime for being the producer of this podcast and bringing it to you here in its lovely presentation that you see here. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it on over to Ashton to take us out of here. So everyone, thanks so much for watching. And until I see you again, take care, everyone.
See ya. Thanks so much.
Everyone.